Welcome to Idea to IPO. This is Rob. I organize Idea to IPO. We've been doing events in Silicon Valley for many, many years. We launched officially on February 1st, 2010. At that time, we had no members and no events on our calendar. At this stage, we have over 100,000 members among all our meetup groups all around the world. We've organized, promoted, and produced over 2,375 events. By any standard, by any measure, we're the most active, most prolific startup event organization in the history of Silicon Valley, bar none. We organize venture capital panels, legal workshops, networking events, and more. These days, we're 100% online. We have an event nearly every day of the week. Check out our schedule at ideatoipo.com. Our featured speaker today is Roger Royse, one of the top startup and venture capital attorneys in Silicon Valley. Roger, take it away.
Okay, thanks very much, Rob, and thank all of you for joining us this Tuesday evening. My name is Roger Royse. I am a partner with the law firm of Haynes & Boone. I'm resident in the Palo Alto office in the heart of Silicon Valley. Haynes & Boone is an international law firm, an AmLaw 100 law firm with offices all over the country and other parts of the world. I, however, am in Palo Alto, and I focus on technology, startups, emerging growth, and venture capital. So for today, we are going to give you all new content. We've never done this before, so stay tuned. I'm a little curious myself what I'm going to talk about, but I do know what the topic is. It's how international startups can move to Silicon Valley. Before we get started, I have a couple of housekeeping items. So you'll notice at the bottom of your screen, if you've ever used Zoom before, there's a chat box and a Q&A box. Chat me if you see something wrong. If you can't see my screen, you can't hear me, I'm too loud, I'm too soft, something like that. But use the Q&A box if you have a substantive question for me. I'm going to talk for 1 hour, going to go through my slides. I got 54 of them. I'll get through half of them if I'm lucky. And then at the top of the hour, 8 o'clock Pacific time, we're going to do 30 minutes of Q&A. And I'm going to collect your questions in the Q&A box, and we'll go through it at that point. So again, before we get started, I do want to let you know that we've got some upcoming programs, International Startups Tonight, a week from today. We have got a venture capital panel. I will be moderating a panel of venture capitalists who invest in a lot of things, including IoT, Internet of Things. We're going to have a panel on latest innovations in IoT. The week after that, on the 15th, our panel is going to be funding in the COVID era. Oh, hold on here, lost my screen. Funding in the COVID era, another venture capital panel. And then on September 22nd, startup strategies in a downturn. All right, because for some people this is a downturn, for other people it just hasn't happened yet, but it's going to. So stay tuned. So that's 3 solid weeks. That's 4 weeks in a row. That might be a new record. I should be in the Guinness Book of Idea to IPO records. 4 weeks in a row, we've got good content, good programs. So for today, before we get started, I like to know who is in the audience. So first of all, I'd like to know where everybody's from. We are doing this in the evenings, so it's morning in some places. We get an international audience for these programs. So it'd be good to know, especially we've got an international program, people coming into Silicon Valley. So I've tossed a few areas of the world on there. And so far, about half the people are from here. Okay, well, no, that's good to know. You know, I want to, I want to tailor my comments. Okay, what else do we have? Okay, wow, Canada and Mexico. We've got a few. Central and South America, one. Asia, a lot. Western Europe, one. Other United States, 2. I'm kind of surprised there's nobody from Russia or Eastern Europe. Okay, about 90% of you have voted. Let's leave this open for a little bit. Okay, well, about half of you are from here. So I don't know how much we want to talk about the international issues, but all right, you know, we'll tailor this to that half as well as the other half. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and end the polling. Let's see. I have another poll that I want to launch, but I'd like to know who is in the audience. So are you startup entrepreneurs? Are you mature established companies? Are you investors? Are you technologists? Are you in education? Are you in government? Or are you a service provider like me or a consultant? Other, you know, geez, I keep trying to get all the categories and somebody keeps coming up with other. What am I missing here? We'll figure it out. Okay, mostly startup entrepreneurs. We've got a couple of investors. You got some tech people, no government people. Good. Oh, press. That's the other. Looks like we got 4 people from the press, so I'll have to be careful what I say. Yeah, probably not. Okay, we've got 85% voted, and half the people are entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs, investors, technology people, some service providers. Alrighty, that gives me probably enough data, in case you're wondering. There you go. Okay, closing the polling. Now we're getting into the substance. I am going to share my screen. All right, I am going to open my slides. All right, you should be looking at my slides. If you're not, chat me or something. Text me, call me, email me, send me a message on Facebook. All right, Silicon Valley, that is where I'm coming to you from. Half of you are from here anyway, so I don't have to tell you this. This is, in some respects, to a lot of us, those of us who live here anyway, somewhat the center of the technology startup universe. And I'm going to talk a little bit about, first of all, before I get into the meat, the substance here, I want to talk a little bit about the Valley and why I'm here. I mean, I grew up in the Midwest. I spent some time in the oil fields practicing law, believe it or not. I spent a lot of time with agriculture out in the Midwest. I moved to New York City 35 years ago. I practiced on Wall Street. I dealt with investment bankers. I came from there down to Hollywood. I did movie deals. I ended up here in 1991. I've been here ever since doing technology companies. I've been here almost 30 years. That makes me as much of a resident as anybody in California, I think. It's a very transient community. Why am I here and what have I noticed in the time that I've been here in Silicon Valley? Well, let me give you 3 things, and these are the 3 reasons you're going to see companies move here from other parts of the country and other parts of the world. Number 1, this is the headquarters to the top tech companies. Just go on and Google top Silicon Valley companies, top Silicon Valley technology companies, and see what comes up. You'll be shocked. You'll be surprised. There's got to be at least $1 trillion of market capitalization in public company stock, headquartered between San Jose and San Francisco. It's a tremendous amount of wealth concentrated in one area. People tell me there's Silicon Valleys all over the world. You've never been to, you know, have you been to Shenzhen? Have you been to Bangalore? There's lots of Silicon Valleys, and yes, there are, but what they don't have is a tremendous concentration of wealth that sits right here. That's important if you're looking for markets. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. So a big reason why companies come here and establish a beachhead here instead of places that are a lot more fun, especially now during COVID. It's the markets, to be close to the markets. I like to tell people that on my way to work, I live in Menlo Park. I work right next door to Facebook when Facebook used to come to work. And I like to tell people that on my way to work, I can drive past some of the biggest companies in the world. I'll drive past, well, Facebook for one, Google, Microsoft, Adobe right up the street, Apple a little further away, biggest companies in the world. They're just right within a short drive of where I am. Secondly, it is home to the venture capital industry. Probably, depending on who you listen to, 25 to 50% of the venture capital in the United States has a beachhead here, if not a home office, if not a sole office here in Silicon Valley. I live very close to a magical place called Sand Hill Road. I ride my bike up and down it almost every weekend, and I think as I drive along Sand Hill Road on my bicycle, half of the venture capital in the country resides in this 1.5 mile stretch of land. People come here for money. If you're a startup company, you're going to be here looking for money at some point. And finally, people come here for talent. We've got a huge university system in this state. We're very close to Stanford. We're very close to Cal Berkeley, to Davis, to Santa Clara, to San Jose, to numerous other universities, colleges. And if you go out a little bit, you'll find even more talent. But I feel like we're sort of in the center of where that talent comes from at that level, and it tends to stay here. So people will come here for talent. So that's the Silicon Valley through my eyes. Now, I want to tell you a little bit, for those of you who are not from here, I've been doing this a long time. Probably half the companies I work with are companies from other countries coming into the Valley, at least half, maybe 80% coming into the Valley. So I've kind of seen it all. And for today, I'm going to tell you how to get here, what to do, what not to do, what to watch out for, what to look for. So how to get to Silicon Valley. So the first thing you have to know is the geography. As odd as it sounds, go get a map, download it, pull it out. Back in the old days, you'd get these big road maps. Go get a road map from the gas station on the corner, open it up and take a look. Put a big pin in Palo Alto. That is the center of Silicon Valley. If someone tells you that San Francisco is Silicon Valley, I would take a rather skeptical view of that opinion. San Francisco sits on the north edge of the valley. San Jose sits on the south edge. Now you'll find some VCs that have moved up to San Francisco, but for the most part, San Francisco is a place, at least before COVID, where millennials used to live, who Google would bus down to the valley to go to work and bus back to the cities so they could hang out in nightclubs after work. It's not where the valley is located. This is where the valley is located. I'm not saying there's not a lot of tech companies up there. There are. And San Francisco, for a while there, it looked like it was going to overtake us in new starts. It's just a funner place to be. It's a cooler place to be if you're a young tech entrepreneur. There's no doubt about it. But lately, we'll talk more about that later. Lately, that's changed. But for the most part, as companies mature, they end up down here. They come down here for funds. They come down here to meet their customers and clients, or they come down here for talent. So think of Palo Alto as the center. Think of San Francisco as the northern edge and San Jose as the southern edge. Now, a couple of things about the valley. Once you get that geography in place, the closer you are to Palo Alto, the closer you are to the center of the beating heart of the valley. And you don't have to go far away, then you're not in Silicon Valley, and dramatically so, not in Silicon Valley. Let me give you an example. Oakland has a very thriving business scene. I like Oakland. I like the East Bay. I have clients in the East Bay. But you'll notice that little green bridge up there. It's about 6 miles between Oakland and San Francisco at the top of, right between San Francisco and Oakland. That 6 miles might as well be 600 miles in terms of how willing people seem to be to want to drive across that bridge. It's not the same. It's not the same feel, not the same vibe. It's not considered part of the valley. I think it's a fine place to live if you want to remote in and spend your time here. Now, the reason I'm pausing on that is because frequently I see companies that come here and they find their space before they actually look around, and they look at this map and they say, gee, Pleasanton doesn't look so far away from Palo Alto. That's got to be Silicon Valley. Well, believe you me, it's not. And if you have to get in that traffic and drive from Pleasanton to Palo Alto, you'll really wish that you had not signed that long-term lease in Pleasanton because some realtor told you it was Silicon Valley. It's not. Just be aware of that. Now, I know everything's changing because of sheltering, and people don't have to be right there, Johnny, on the spot. In fact, we've done several panels, and we'll do more about VCs talking about funding startup founders they've never met. They've only met them virtually. But I believe that's a short-term phenomenon that's going to go away as soon as the hysteria around COVID goes away. So, I'm going to give you my historical perspective. And historically, it's an effort to get from this valley anyplace else. Now, you go across the bridge, you see Fremont. A lot of good tech companies have facilities in Fremont because space is cheap, relatively speaking. You will definitely see that. But the heart of the financial services, the legal, the accounting, the management, that's going to be the closer to Palo Alto or the more you'll find that. San Jose has a lot of tech companies as well. They tend to be a little more mature, I think, because San Jose was front and that's where I first moved to when I came here. They were front and center and pushed their programs really hard. They had a very welcoming business environment, relatively speaking, in California terms. And there are a lot of companies that locate it down there, but they're going to come up to Palo Alto for legal, financial, or other service providers. So, all right, so now we know where we are. Now we know what I'm talking about when I say Silicon Valley. So let's get into it. Let's break this into two categories. One of my personality flaws is that I'm a lawyer. So I'm going to talk a lot about the law, and the legal issues, the legal considerations for coming into this valley. I'll go through all of these in detail. So I'm just going to tee this up now. So go get your coffee, get it ready, for the legal portion of this. But the other part about this is the non-legal. Go ahead and take a look at a website I created called Total Startup Solution if you want to look for resources in the non-legal side, because when people come into this valley, companies come into this valley, here's one thing, here's the first lesson you need to know about doing business in the United States. It is Byzantine, it is bureaucratic, it is formalistic in ways that people from other countries really can't imagine until you get here. And you're going to need a lot of help. You just are. You're going to need a lot of help on a lot of things that you might not have thought about in other places. Let me walk through a few of them. First of all, I'm the first person you should see. Your lawyer is your friend. There are 170,000 lawyers in California. There's a reason for that, right?
Roger.
There wouldn't be lawyers if there weren't demand.
If you have slides, they're not showing.
They're not?
No.
All right, hold on a second, folks.
Now they're showing.
Now they're showing. Sorry about that. So you didn't see any of my past slides?
Right, but we thought you were doing a stand-up routine.
All right. Well, I'm going to show them to you just so. Here, let's try this one. Do you see a slide?
Yes.
Does it say Silicon Valley?
Yes.
Do you see a map?
Yes.
Oh, man, I did that whole thing and you didn't have my visual in front of you. Okay, legal considerations. Now we're getting into non-legal considerations. Jump in if my commentary doesn't match what you're seeing on the screen. And by the way, these slides are available. Just send me an email if you'd like to get the slides. There's going to be a lot of information in these slides that I'm just not going to get to, and I'm going to have to go over quite quickly. Okay, so number one, you're going to want to see a lawyer, but the next person you're going to want is an accountant, a CPA. Tax return filing is so important here in the United States. You really do need to file your tax returns and get a CPA on board as quickly as possible. Payroll and benefits. Don't try to do this yourself, right? You can. The law doesn't require you to outsource payroll and benefits, but it is tricky, it is difficult. There are huge penalties if you get this wrong. There are plenty of services that are varying levels of high and low touch that will do this for you and that work at different levels of the market. You can even do this online now. You can do this with a very personal representative, but you're going to want somebody to handle payroll. Why is that? Because someone needs to get you into the system so you can withhold taxes on your employees, that you can make sure that they're covered by workers' compensation, that they're entitled to unemployment benefits if something bad happens, like a pandemic, that they also, if you're providing insurance, and once you get big enough in places, you have to provide certain types of insurance. We'll get to that, hopefully. They're going to take care of all of that for you, and they're going to do the reporting and handle the compliance. You have to report to the state, you have to report to the federal government, and depending what city you're in, you may have city reports to file. The bigger cities all have city reports as well. Space, this is an area that is just in such flux. I don't even know what to say about it anymore. It's changing so much. There was a time that one of the first people you would call as a realtor to make sure you could get office space. Well, then we got co-works, and that popped up all over the place. I have to tell you, I think that put a lot of realtors out of business because people weren't renting offices anymore. They were renting desks, and they were dirt cheap and they were easy to come by. But if you've walked through a co-work lately, in fact, even I had 2 co-work spaces as offices in LA and Orange County. But if you walk through a co-work lately, it's like a ghost town if they're even open. So I don't even know what to tell you about space anymore. What I can tell you is you do need to have an address here. I'm going to get to that in a little bit. The way you get an address is by getting space, and make it a real address. Don't just rent a mailbox. You know, be real about it when you get an address. So you're going to have to get space in some manner here in the Valley because people are raising their hands. If you have questions, put it into the Q&A box, and I'll get to the questions at the end of the program, okay? All right. Insurance. This is California. It's a very litigious state. The country generally is a litigious place, but the state is very litigious. And I have to have this discussion quite a lot with a lot of people, a lot of companies. I have to tell them the easiest thing in the world in the state is to sue somebody, right? And you don't have to be right to sue somebody, and it can cause an enormous amount of problem and hassle. And if you do get tagged for one of the numerous things you can get tagged for in this state, you definitely want to have insurance. I'll give you an example. There's a bill pending in our legislature in California right now that would impose strict liability for defective products on the online retail sellers like eBay and Etsy for any product sold over their site. Okay, that just gives you, so in other words, if a product gets sold, you buy a product on eBay, turns out to be defective, you get hurt, strict liability is in the bill that's been proposed. It's not law yet, but it gives you an idea of what the environment is like. There's very heavy bias towards allowing people to have their day in court and to air their grievances and collect. And as you can imagine, that means this is a very expensive state to do business in an expensive country. You have to accommodate that by getting insurance. So the insurance broker is one of the first people you should talk to. You should go through what all the risks are that you need to insure against. I promise you, you'll be surprised, but you'll sleep a lot better. Banking is another one. Banking is a tough one. All right. You may not be used to this in other countries. Maybe you are, depending on the country. But establishing a banking relationship in normal times would have required an in-person, face-to-face visit. Some banks that I know of have loosened up on that requirement, especially now. They're willing to work around that, but they definitely want to know who you are. They've got AML, KYC concerns. Do you know what I mean by that? AML is anti-money laundering. KYC is know your customer. They need to know who you are. They need to know that your money's clean. And they're going to be extremely conservative about it over and over again, time after time. I've had clients come to me and tell me that in the whole process of setting up their business, the banking was the hardest part. Finding the right banker, convincing them, getting them the right documents. So don't take this lightly, because you really can't do anything in this state unless you've got a banking relationship. And by the way, there's two things you should know about that. If your business is crypto, or if your business is cannabis, good luck getting a bank. You're going to have a very tough time. You won't find one for cannabis in California. You'll have to find a workaround. There's ways to deal with it, but nobody's going to bank cannabis. It's federally illegal. That's why. And you are not likely to find anyone who will bank crypto, or I haven't yet. So you'll have to do something more creative. And then cap table management, we'll get to that later, but there are lots and lots of ancillary services and tools and things online, valuation services as an example, that just make the startup process a lot easier. And you might just think of that, just outsource as much as you can. If this is not your core competency, these tools have become dirt cheap on a lot of these things. You can outsource it a lot cheaper than trying to waste your valuable founder time doing it yourself. Okay, your next slide should say U.S. branch versus U.S. incorporation. So how do you enter this country, and how do you enter this state? There's two ways. You're going to be inclined, first of all, to say, well, you know what, I'm just going to hire an employee, just like we did it back in Europe, and we're going to set up a branch, and I'm going to do business through that branch. It's cheap, it's easy. I have to file some papers with the state maybe, but I don't have to don't have to talk to a lot of lawyers, don't have to worry about setting up a company. Yes, that's true, but you don't want to do that, okay? Never, all right? I tell people that 99% of the time, the choice of entity is going to be a corporation over an LLC, but 100% of the time, it's going to be an entity over a, holy cow, 37 chats. 100% of the time, it's going to be an entity over not having an entity at all, okay? And again, if you have questions, put them in the Q&A box. I'm going to get to that at the end of this. Okay, so now that we decided to establish an entity, and by the way, why do we do that? Why do we want to have an entity? Why do you not want to have a branch? Well, I gave you one reason, right? This is a litigious state, right? This is a litigious state, and you do not want to have your foreign entity go down in flames because of some California law, some California liability, and they can be extensive. You can get penalized for a lot of things that will surprise you. Well, we're going to get into some of that today. So you want to protect yourself from potential liabilities by putting them all in a branch. Putting them all in an entity. Second is tax. You want an entity to remove you, the foreign entity, from your U.S. tax obligations. And again, the IRS is a very long reach, but it's nothing like the state of California will do if they come after you. And we're going to get into this if I have time towards the end, but California has a much different way of calculating a foreign corporation's income than the federal government does. And it requires a lot more information and is more far-reaching. If you have questions, put them in the Q&A box. I'll get to it at the end. Okay, having said that, your next question is, well, geez, I read someplace that I should, form my corporation in Wyoming. It used to be Nevada was the jurisdiction of choice, but my office is going to be in California. Shouldn't I have a California company? And why is it that everybody goes to Delaware? So again, let me give you some data. I'm a California lawyer. My office is in California. I have no offices in Nevada. I'm licensed in Nevada, by the way. I have no offices in Delaware. I have no offices in Wyoming. But 95% of the companies I form are under Delaware law. Why is that? Okay. First of all, Delaware is internationally known, internationally recognized. Not only the state of Joe Biden, that's not what it's known for. It is known because of its very well-known, very established Delaware Corporations Code that the venture capitalists love, right? Because they know what they're getting when they buy into Delaware. And they're getting something that can be very favorable to them, whereas in some states it can't be. If you want me to get more specific about that, I will tell you that the biggest reason in Delaware, we can abrogate class voting, or we can require class voting so that all the shares, abrogate class voting so that all shares, preferred and common, vote as one class. So you won't have one class like the common stockholders preventing a company from doing a merger or an acquisition. That's probably more detail than you want. What you need to know is that VCs love Delaware. If you don't start in Delaware, they're going to make you move to Delaware before they invest in you. So if that's your exit, Delaware is where you need to be. Even if it's not, Delaware has a very good corporations code. We know what it means. We understand it. It's got a lot of case law. And unlike some other states, some more activist states, some states I'm not going to mention out loud, the Delaware Chancery Court is known for enforcing the law as it's written. They're not going to make exceptions. They're not going to create new law. They're not going to, they're not viewed as wacky. That's why people like Delaware, you know what you're getting. All right. No political commentary there. I'm just telling you that, they are just viewed as being much more strict constructionists. And if you're in business, that's what you want. You want to know the laws. And then third and finally, I should mention a lot of good law in Delaware on fiduciary duties. You can disclaim fiduciary duties in a Delaware LLC, for example, to a surprising extent. You can't do that in a lot of other states. So, investors love Delaware, directors love Delaware. Directors are the manager of the company, they're making the decision, so that's where they're going to be. I keep talking about corporations, but you heard me mention limited liability company. Which one's right for you? Let me make this really easy for you, because from time to time I have people come to me and they say, well, we heard about this LLC, it's really great, it's a pass-through entity, and I heard pass-throughs are good, so my foreign corporation is going to form an LLC. It's good if you're a U.S. person. It's bad if you're not, because you're treated as though you're doing business through a branch. If we have time, I'll dive into what that means, but as a practical matter, for most companies, unless you have a certain type of income tax treaty protection that you might not have, you probably won't have, in fact, it means that your company is going to be taxed exactly the same as if you had a corporation. So you get no tax benefit from having that LLC. So there is a narrow exception where I will use an LLC subsidiary, and that's for a company that just needs a U.S. company. They don't want to have a U.S. presence here. They're not going to do business here. They just need a a shell of a U.S. company that's not taxable in the United States. They just need the charter, not the taxable presence. But that's not you, because the title of this seminar is how to move to Silicon Valley. Partnerships got the same problem. A C corporation is what you want to be. It's a separate entity. It's taxed by itself. Your liabilities stop at that company. It's like a whole different person. That's what you want to stop your liability and your tax here at the border of the United States. If you're a foreigner, you don't qualify to own stock in an S corporation. We need not talk about it. And God help you if you want to use a statutory trust. Talk about complexity. All right, so now we know how you're going to enter this. We know why you're going to come here. We know how you're going to do it. You're going to form a U.S. subsidiary. It's going to be a corporation. Your foreign parent company is going to own 100% of that corporation. And the corporation in the U.S. is going to conduct your U.S. business. It's, whatever that business is. You're probably going to hire a few people. You're going to do some sales and marketing. You're going to access this huge market here. And remember, I said you come here for talent. You hired people. You come here for the market. You've accessed the market. You come here for money. Now you're going to go talk to investors like Henry. And you're going to say, Henry, would you invest some money in my company? And Henry's going to say, well, yeah, but I only invest in Delaware corporations. Are you a Delaware corporation? And you say, well, I'll tell you what, if you make an investment, I'll become a Delaware corporation. And Henry's going to say, I'll tell you what, you become a Delaware corporation and maybe I'll invest in you. So it's a little bit of a chicken and egg, isn't it? So what do we do in that scenario? So the first rule is you need to form that U.S. corporation. So you can legitimately tell your investor, yes, we have a U.S. corporation, and I promise you that at close of your investment, that U.S. corporation will own everything. Well, take a look at my simple diagram here. Got a UK parent, which owns intellectual property, right? It owns goodwill. It has, all the home office. It's got the management. It's got, the heart and soul of the business. And then it's got this, measly little U.S. corporation that's got a couple of salespeople. That doesn't sound like you're a U.S. company, does it? So how are we going to turn that into a U.S. company? What we really want is the U.S. company to own everything and maybe operate in the UK through a measly little subsidiary with a couple of salespeople. How do we make that happen? And that brings us to the famous or infamous inbound flip transaction. Here is the flip transaction. We started off with a foreign company and a U.S. company, but the foreign company had everything, might have even owned all the stock of the U.S. company, not necessarily, but maybe it did. But the intellectual property, right, the technology, the thing that the secret sauce is owned by the foreign company. So what do? Step one, shareholders of foreign company contribute their foreign company stock to the U.S. company. In exchange for that, U.S. company issues stock to the shareholders. And when the smoke clears, now the shareholders own all of a U.S. company, which owns all of a foreign company. In its simplest form, that is the flip transaction, the inbound flip. I've done it 100 times. Now, there's a lot of complexity to it. I won't get into it, but that's basically it. It's a lot of things you have to care for. The biggest one, the one you need to just kind of cross off the list immediately, is foreign tax consequences. This is a really easy thing to do as a U.S. matter. As a foreign matter, it might be a difficult thing to do. Okay, and some countries are worse than others about this. Some countries are going to make this more painful than others. They don't like you leaving their country, right? If it becomes too painful, I've got other ways to get to the same point. We can do stapled entities. We can do brother, sister. I put in place structures where every time you invest in U.S. company, you invest in the foreign company. We have to do that in China sometimes. We have to do that in Canada sometimes. So there are ways around it, but this is the basic simple structure. Keep that in mind. So when somebody asks you, gee, you're a UK company, not a US company, what are you going to do? You can say, oh, we'll do a flip transaction when the time is right. Don't worry, we got it covered. Already talked to my European advisors. Now, let me take a step back. I'm going to get more into the law stuff, but I want to give you some big picture things to think about, because this is going to be very confusing when you get here, not only for you as non-residents, but to even the people who live here. We've got a schizophrenic country. And I don't mean Democrats versus Republicans. I mean the policy goals of open competition and free markets and freedom of contract versus consumer and employee protection. So you're going to see laws like our antitrust laws that encourage open competition, laws that allow people to be independent contractors versus protectionist securities laws, crowdsourcing that allow people to invest in companies versus protectionist laws, right? Like California's recent anti-gig economy law, AB5, that makes Uber drivers employees to protect the Uber drivers, right? Or consumer protection laws generally, or securities laws that protect the investor at the expense of the company who can't get the investor's money because they're not allowed to invest because they're presumed not to know what they're doing. You're going to find that tension throughout our system. And the reason I'm pausing on this is because this is not intuitive at all. In fact, it's very counterintuitive. You cannot trust your instincts on this. You can't trust your judgment. Think of George Costanza on Seinfeld. A lot of times the opposite of what you want to do is what you should do. So just keep that in mind. Again, 170,000 lawyers in this state. You know, you wonder why. You need to look it up. You need to get advice on almost everything that you do in this country. Sorry to say. Second thing, again, where this country is schizophrenic, we have a federal system and we have a state system. And sometimes the two happily agree, other times they do not. Most of the time they do not. You've got two completely different sets of laws that you have to comply with. Let's use an example. Cannabis, right? If you're in Colorado or California or one of another 40 states, cannabis is just fine. You can go down to the store in San Francisco and buy cannabis. Of course, by the time you get back to your car, it'll be broken into, but aside from that, you can still do it, right? You're violating federal law when you do that. All right, so we have one set of federal laws, one set of state laws. It's hard to navigate that. And you see that pop up in a lot of different areas, not just cannabis. You see it pop up in securities regulation. We have a set of securities laws that in some places can be very permissive, but the states really crack down and limit. So you're going to find that tension. So the question always has two answers. It has a state law answer and it has a federal law answer. Sometimes it even has a state, local, or county answer, a city answer. If you're in some cities, you're going to find some surprising, city regulations you have to comply with. So you have to keep in mind that you're always dealing with a lot of different masters that you have to comply with. Now, that's pretty high level, so I'm going to get into some of the details now. I'm going to come back to that. That's pretty specific. Let me just say a couple things about foreign personnel and employees and bringing employees into the United States. So first of all, I'm not an immigration lawyer. I work with an immigration lawyer. But of course, nobody can work in this country unless they have the proper permitting. They have authority to work here. Just keep that in mind. I'm going to answer, I haven't even looked at my Q&A, but I bet 10 people have already asked me this because I get this all day, every day. Gee, I don't have my B1 visa, or I do have one, or whatever it is. I do or I don't. I'm present, I'm not present. Can I form a U.S. company? The answer is yes. It happens all the time, every day. Yes, you can form a U.S. company. You can even be a director of that company. What you can't do is you can't earn any money from that company. You can't be employed and draw salary from it, but you can form that company and that company can hire somebody else. Thanks, Henry. Maybe I'll think about it. California employee classification issues. So here's another big surprise. I want to drill down on some of these regulatory issues, right? California has taken a very restrictive and unique position in this country on who's an employee and who's not. And I'm going to make this short, but I got to give you a little bit of background. So it means a big deal to be an employee in this country and in this state. It means that you get minimum wage. You're entitled to overtime unless you're exempt. You're entitled to get, to breaks, to meal breaks, to waiting time. You don't get paid, and if you sue your employer, you get your attorney's fees. You get all sorts of stuff by being an employee. You're entitled to enforce discrimination laws. You're entitled to bring an action on behalf of everybody else who's similarly situated, even if they don't want to join your lawsuit. Right? You're entitled to, if you're big enough, if the company's big enough, you're entitled to benefits. You're entitled to the company picking up part of your self-employment tax obligation. So employees really do get cared for. That's just it at a high level. There's a lot of reasons why it's way different to be an employee. You get a lot more rights. Now, here in the United States and in California generally, we've always had an issue where, you know, someone has to pay for all those benefits. And if you're an employee, it's the employer. And by some, depending on the amount that they're making, by some measure, and I hear this number a lot, it's another 30% cost to the employer. I'm going to say that again. Costs 30% more to hire someone as an employee than it does to hire them as an independent contractor. That's on the employer side. On the employee side, well, geez, you're withholding from my pay, you know, you're forcing me into this plan I don't want, you know, all these other things I don't like. All I have is a punch a time card, you know, et cetera. I want to work my own hours. I want to be independent, et cetera. I don't want to be an employee either. So oftentimes, you know, people will say, we're just not going to call you an employee. We're going to treat you as an independent contractor, not going to give you all these rights. I'm not going to withhold taxes. You know, I'm not going to account for your hours. Very bad idea. Companies go down in flames a lot for that. That's a bad idea. You know, the employees who are they call that a misclassified employee. They will sue, and you know, if they win, that's a big, big expensive lawsuit for the company. California, effective January 1 this year, expanded the definition of who is an employee with a law that was designed to capture Uber and Lyft drivers, right? Ride share drivers. That's who it was designed to capture. They say Uber and Lyft drivers need to be protected. We're going to make them all employees. The law passed, went into effect early this year. Uber and Lyft did not comply. Let me tell you the history. I'm sorry I have to pause on this, but this is important. I'm going to tell you why. The Attorney General sued them. The California State Court ruled in favor of the Attorney General, and how. You ought to read the opinion. The appeals court stayed that decision so that Uber and Lyft have an opportunity to appeal, because they said, look, if we can't reverse this on appeal, we're leaving. In fact, if you looked at their website, they said, we're done. We're done with California. We're shutting down. We're not doing business here. So an appeals court gave them a stay so that they could brief it, they could file briefs and argue it to the appeals court. We don't know what's going to happen in that litigation. We do know that there is a proposition, Prop 22, that's on the ballot that would change the law and would exempt app-based drivers from this new law. All right. Honestly, we all think that ballot measure is going to pass. Do you really want to give up your Uber? Do you want to give up your Lyft? I don't think you do. We all think that law is going to pass. So where does that leave us? Does that mean AB 5 goes away? No, it leaves us with the worst world. It leaves us with a place where we've got a law that reclassifies a wide group of people that nobody was even thinking about as employees now, and exempts the exact people that the law is aimed at getting. That's what is likely to happen. You need to know that, because you might be within that wide group of people that's covered by AB 5. So if you come into Silicon Valley and do business, you might have to treat someone as an employee that you would treat as a contractor in Nevada. And that is not a theoretical distinction. There are a lot of companies that are hiring people in Nevada instead of California just for that reason, right? Because they don't want to have to deal with having to treat someone as an employee who doesn't want to be an employee. So stay tuned. It doesn't look likely that the state's going to do anything to change that odd result. So just think of it as a cost to doing business. It's a cost to being in Silicon Valley. That's how I look at it. The other thing I want to tell you about the Valley, if we have time, when we do, is that this valley was built on equity compensation. This is something that also is unique. Companies from other parts of the world, they have a lot of trouble with this, especially big companies. Wait, you're giving equity, you're giving pieces of ownership in the mothership to your employees. Are you crazy? Are you insane? That's so expensive. That's how it's done here. Get used to it. Everybody has stock options. Everyone knows what they are. You can walk down the street in Palo Alto and ask any 4-year-old girl what a stock option is, and she might not know what it is, but she knows she's going to have some someday. All right, it's that pervasive. So equity compensation means that. It means you pay people in stock or you pay them in options, which is a right to acquire stock. Now, there are numerous variations of this. Let me just give you a couple of things. Number one, it can be stock in the foreign company. That's okay. Keep that in mind. I get that question a lot. Number two, yes, you have to comply with federal law and state law, California state law, if it's a California resident or a California company. Keep that in mind. As you might expect, California has its own set of rules on this. The third thing is that tax issues loom large in this. You want to do equity compensation in a way that does not penalize the recipient by making them taxable on this illiquid, non-marketable stock that they can't sell and turn into cash in order to pay their taxes with. Keep that in mind, and there are ways to do this. A grant of an option is not taxable. A grant of stock typically is. But you'll need tax advice on this before you do it. You're definitely going to want to consider it. You're probably going to want to do it. If you do migrate here through a flip or otherwise, you will definitely do it. I want to talk a little bit about intellectual property. If you're, this, like I said that the Valley was built on equity compensation. Now I'm going to say the Valley was built on technology. Most of my clients are tech companies. Let's talk about a few of the tech. And by the way, technology and intellectual property are two different things, right? The technology, right, is the process, the system, the know-how, the secret, whatever it is that gives you value. The intellectual property are the legal rights that attach to it and protect it. So let's talk about intellectual property. First of all, patents. Everybody knows what they are. You get a patent by filing. I want to let you know that here in the United States, we are now on a first to file system. So you want to file early, you want to file often. We do a whole program on this. Look it up online. Oh, by the way, all of these talks are stored online. You can find them on YouTube, on the Roger Royse YouTube site. Look it up. You can see all of these presentations. Design patents for utility patents. You're patenting a particular use. Design patents, it protects the features. It's a little bit different. That's all I'll say about it. I don't see that as much. I don't think it's as important as a utility patent. Those have real value, especially to VCs. Copyrights, software. In my world, software gets copyrighted. I don't have very many movies or scripts or authors or musical works. I do have a lot of people with software, and we don't even copyright software anymore because it is such weak IP protection. If you can, you'll patent it instead or rely on trade secret because software qualifies for all of those. And then finally, trademark. Be really careful about this. You really want to be careful that you're not going to infringe on somebody's trademark, and that when you come into this valley, with your mark that you spent all your time building up in a foreign country, when you come into this valley, you don't end up building up that mark here only to find out that you've infringed and you could be shut down and stopped from using that mark or forced to pay someone a royalty for using it. So do your homework, do your diligence. All of these rights are local. All these rights are territorial. That means you got to register them here in the United States federally, right? You want federal protection. There is such a thing as a California trademark, but you want federal protection. So keep that in mind. This is something that you really want to plan into, especially the trademark, because all your goodwill is going to be wrapped up in that trademark. And here in the United States, someone could stop you from using it if you're infringing. Now, I want to pause on trade secret. This is pretty big because whether you know it or not, this is probably the most valuable IP that you have. Your mark is really valuable too. I get that. But this secret process, the way you do it, the formula, the pattern, the program, maybe the code, that's really valuable. The stuff you didn't patent, but maybe works around and with the patent. Trade secret, your most valuable asset, but also really the most fragile. So how are you going to protect that? Because you've heard about Silicon Valley, you watch the HBO show, you know about the sharks out there, the people that steal ideas. How are you going to keep them from stealing your idea, right? Well, first of all, let's define what's protectable, because in the definition lies the solution. What is a trade secret? Well, it has to be valuable. That's number one. Number two, it has to be secret, right? People don't know about it. Number three, you have to do something to keep it secret. Number three is the important one. You have to do something to keep it secret. If you don't take reasonable precautions, the court will not hold it as a trade secret or as secret. So what does that mean? That means NDAs. Okay, let me start with that. Non-disclosure agreements, confidential information agreements, invention assignments. It means having processes in your company so that people can't go in and hack your secrets. You have processes that protect it so that when your employees leave, they don't walk out the door with your trade secrets. So that's what that means. And that's where people mess up, is by not taking reasonable precautions. Now, having said that, I'm going to give you the exception that proves the exception. What I said about NDAs. Be careful with NDAs. The better plan is just to not disclose secrets to anybody you don't want to have them. If you absolutely must, because you're in due diligence, you'll get an NDA. Don't go walking around the Silicon Valley waving an NDA in front of everybody you talk to. First of all, they won't sign it. VCs will not sign them. Investors won't sign them. Number one. Number two, you're going to look silly asking them for it. Number three, they're going to think you don't know what you're doing. So, you wait until they're ready to do diligence, but then you get number two. Second thing about NDAs is make sure you've really got an NDA. Make sure that you draft it. Make sure it's an NDA that actually does protect you and doesn't do everything but. I've seen both kinds. You want to be careful about trade secret, and this is something you need to orchestrate, you need to think about, because it would be a real shame. Nice little company you got there, it'd be a real shame if something happened to it. All right. Cross-border trade secrets. The point I want to make is the prudent thing to do is to protect your intellectual property, primarily your trade secret and your patents for that matter, under the law of the country you're from, where you've got people actually working wherever they are, they're back in Europe, writing code, doing design, and the law where you put your office, which might be California. It's not hard to do, but make sure you've complied with both sets of laws. Right? It's usually not that hard. They're usually not that different. But you don't want to have somebody sue you in a different court and manage to defeat your rights. We do a whole program on investors. Given the time, I am just going to pause on this for one slide. There's numerous investment vehicles. Go look at our slides if you want to see how to deal with VCs, how to negotiate with VCs. The things that I want to impress upon you is just two things. Number one, question I get all the time, can I get a VC to invest in my foreign startup? The answer varies from no, maybe to yes, depending on what the startup is, who you are, and who the VC is. So keep that in mind. It really does depend. As a general rule, it is going to be infinitely easier here to have people invest in a Delaware corporation for all the reasons that I mentioned. If you're super hot and it's a big VC, they probably have a foreign affiliate, their Asia Pacific affiliate that will invest in your Singapore corporation for you. Maybe they will directly. Some of them will do that. I do have Cayman corporations. I do have VC investment, a little bit more and more. But keep in mind, VCs are bureaucrats. They don't like to see their money going outside their control, where somebody might make them subject to criticism for not being able to enforce their rights, get their money back, or get the deal that they think they bargained for. So you're going to be way ahead if you don't even ask the question. If you do have to ask the question, you might want to know the answer ahead of time by determining who your investor is. Let me just say one thing about, I wonder if I can take another poll, because, let's take another poll, because I'd like to know where we should go from here. And I know who you are. I know you probably want to talk about raising money, but a lot of you folks, you might want to be interested in investing in real estate. I've got a whole set of slides on that. Maybe it's more about marketing. Maybe it's about hiring. Maybe it's just establishing a branch. So far, accessing the market, raising money in the Valley. We got people who do want to hear about real estate. Two people. All righty. Well, with the 5 minutes we've got left, I see, okay, it's like a horse race here. So far, the people who are winning, the people who want to know about access in the U.S. market. So I'm going to jump ahead to that. For those of you who want to know about investing in U.S. real estate, ask me about the slides or come look at one of our webinars that goes into great detail about this. But this is something that's very specific and not something I'm going to be able to cover in 5 minutes. Let me just say that we're seeing a tremendous amount of foreign money coming into U.S. real estate. Happens every day. Happens even when there's not a downturn. We're going to see more of it now, and this really is a matrix of, it's game theory to the nth degree in figuring out how to do it. So it's not simple, it's not easy, but there is an optimal solution. So let me put it that way, and maybe Rob, the next presentation we'll do will be on how to invest in U.S. real estate. But for now, I want to talk about something more important, more pressing, something that you have not heard about as much as you probably should, and that is what the states are doing here in the United States. So let me set this up. The economy is changing. Just even since I came to California, it's changing. When I moved here, there was no Google. There was no Facebook. There wasn't even a Zuckerman, I don't think. So we couldn't even conceive of these companies. You know, there was no eBay even. You couldn't even conceive. You couldn't even imagine them. That's not the way commerce got done. And shortly before I moved here, the states were fighting for sales taxes based on sellers, you know, putting things in the mail and shipping physical products, you know, and people getting a big, you know, Sears and Roebuck catalog and going through and getting on the telephone and calling people and ordering stuff. Business has changed a lot since then, right? It's changed a lot. It's changed in ways that sellers, including from other countries, can sell into a state and have no presence there at all. So it used to be that you buy everything from Fry's. Well, now you buy it from Amazon. That's just, you know, it's a typical example. So how is a state going to get its sales tax? And if it can't get its sales tax, how's it going to make up that difference? So that's one. So I want to pause on that in a minute, but I want to let you know that the states, you have to deal with the states now. So let me go through the first rules. First of all, you can't transact interstate business without qualifying. Don't do it. Secondly, California in particular, it's leading the nation, but that means the rest of the nation will follow, has some very tough privacy laws. They're on a par with the GDPR in Europe. In fact, I'd say they're worse, they're different, they're sometimes even opposite. But we have privacy laws that are very wide-reaching and wide-ranging. And if you're selling to California consumers, you need to be concerned about our privacy laws. That means putting some disclaimers and some tools on your website. And again, to transact business in the state, you're going to have to qualify here. And if you're doing interstate business, you're going to have to file tax returns here. Now, let me get to the tax stuff, because that's what's important here. There's three things to think about. There's income tax net presence. That means that the state can tax your income. There's sales tax nexus. That means they tax your sales, right? And there's a concept called economic nexus, also known as, well, sometimes, and another concept called click-through nexus. So what do I mean by this in the last minute that I have? Well, for income tax purposes, what I mean is that you're doing business in the state. Or if you're in California and a lot of other states, this is this economic nexus idea. If you have enough sales in the state, you're going to end up having to file a tax return and pay taxes here. Okay, we can drill down on this at your leisure. Sales tax nexus, you might be required to collect sales taxes on your sale just because you've had somebody sell into the state on your behalf. So you might be deemed to be engaged in business here. For sure you are if you have a person here or an office, but that's not where the tension is now. The tension is that we have some online sellers. But the good news is that most of them will go ahead and comply with the sales tax on your behalf. You just have to be aware. So this is a big one, so don't think about that. I want to end with jurisdiction generally. Just keep in mind that it's pretty easy to be subject to the laws of the state. It only requires minimum contacts. We have a lot of commentary on this on our website. You should take a look at it if you like, if you want to hear more about it. And a lot of companies will go to a lot of trouble just to make sure they don't become subject to the state's jurisdiction, both for taxes as well as litigation. So I am Roger Royse. I'm a partner with Haynes & Boone. You can reach me at that number. Before I put that back up, I do want to plug my book, Dead on Arrival, How to Avoid the Legal Mistakes That Could Kill Your Startup. We go into all of these issues in depth. Take a look at the book. It's a little old now. It's 8 years old. And it is available on audiobook, so you can listen to it in the car. Okay, with that, Rob, I'm not going to turn it back to you. I'm going to open it up to questions. So let me go to my Q&A. All right. Okay, we got a bunch of questions. All right, can you get the slides in the recording? Yeah, they're all available. If you want to email me, I'm happy to give you all of those. You can find them also on SlideShare. You can find the recording after a while on the IDO YouTube site. You can find it shortly on the If you look on YouTube, Roger Royse, Royse Law on YouTube, Royse Law Firm on YouTube. Okay, hello, I can't see the slides. I hope you got them now. Please share the slides. I did. Okay, banking question. Do I need to have a bank with a physical office in California to move my business here? What about online-only commercial banks? Yeah, that works. That works fine if you can do that. It's just that usually when people come here, they're collecting money, and they want to have a bank, and they've just formed a new U.S. corporation. So the bank, you have to have banks will require you to have a physical office someplace, but if you can find somebody that'll do that online, I think that's a good alternative. I like a little higher touch in a banker myself. I'd like to have a person to call to deal with issues. So, and that usually requires a physical presence. The problem is everything is in flux now with the sheltering rules. It's just hard to generalize anymore. I'm speaking generally as to when things go back to normal, but who knows what normal is. But the reason I pause on it is because new companies, need to pay bills. To pay bills, they need to have a bank account. They need a place to put money into. Open a bank account, they need to have a bank. The bank's going to want them to have a local office. To have a local office, you have to qualify to do business in the state. So you're going to have to appoint an agent. So it's a whole thing. That's kind of my point. All right, let's see. Somebody wants to form an LLC in Delaware online. Okay, remember what I said. It's super easy to do all of this stuff online. You can form companies online. You can go buy all the rope you need to hang yourself. But an LLC company is not going to give you what you need. It's going to put you in a worse position. It's going to make your foreign company, if the foreign company owns 100% or any percent of a limited liability taxed as a partnership doing business in the United States, that foreign company is deemed to be doing business in the United States for tax purposes, has to file a tax return, has to get into the U.S. tax system, right? Has to get into the state tax system. I didn't talk a lot about this, I just touched on it, but California has this thing called formulary apportionment. So once you're in our system, what it means is unlike the federal government, which is just going to look at the income that is effectively connected to your U.S. business, California is going to look at your worldwide income. And then we're going to apply apportionment factors to figure out how much is allocable here. Now, I know the accountants in the group are going to say, well, wait a minute, what about the Water's Edge election? Yes, that's true. There's a way out of that trap. But go look up a case called Barclays Bank if you want to see how difficult that can be on you. It's just not something you want to do. You want to have a corporation, not an LLC, as a general rule. The only time you're not going to do that is if your U.S. company is in name only. You're not going to have an office here. You're not going to have a presence here. You're doing business with a U.S. customer that just doesn't want to deal with a foreigner. They want to deal with a U.S. company, but you don't want to be subject to tax here. We find that more and more now in an online, post-COVID environment. So there's a visa question. I'm not an immigration lawyer, so I'm not going to say much about this, but the question is, what kind of visa would a company owner need to obtain? But I do have an opinion, of course. Typically, your company owner, the way I see it happen is there are investment-related visas you might want to think about. If you're not able to qualify for one of those, they'll form the company. The company gets to enough mass, enough substance, it becomes a real business. It sponsors the owner as a business visitor or maybe on an L visa. We have immigration people that deal with that. Trademark question. So if I have a Canadian trademark, I would not be able to use it if somebody already has registered in California by the Secretary of State. So what I said about California registration of trademarks, the field is pretty much preempted by federal law. California does have this process, but if you want federal trademark protection, you need to register federally, and trademarks are local, and they're based on use, not registration. Registration just gives the world notice of it. So what I'm saying is that you want to do a search when you come into the country and into the state, and you want to find out if somebody else is using a mark or a name that's very similar to yours. And first you'll do a Google search, and you'll go to the Patent and Trademark Office and see if anybody's registered it. And if not, it would be prudent for you to go ahead and register it and protect it so that you have the rights. And if somebody is using it out there, they have a period of time that they can challenge you or forever hold their peace. If you don't do that, you're always going to be looking over your shoulder, not knowing if you've got rights to use that mark in this country. Other visa question, email me about that and I'll connect you with my immigration lawyers. Is there any recommended way to set up a corporation for both Canada and the US? You know, believe it or not, Canada is so complicated. You think it'd be so much easier because it's right next door. But it's complicated because everybody wants to use S corporations going into Canada, which you can do, but the tax rules get to be complicated. You really do need advice. So other than that, wow, there's a lot of people from Canada here, aren't there? Other than that, all the other rules apply. I mean, either you're a U.S. company, you've got a U.S. corporation with a Canadian subsidiary, and this is your home office, or you're a Canadian company with a U.S. subsidiary. The only thing I'd caution you is my experience is that it's very difficult to do a flip transaction out of Canada because they will tax that transaction. I'm not a Canadian lawyer, but I've done enough of these deals where that has been my experience. And this is not legal advice, just my experience. Having said that, that doesn't mean you can't set it up the way you want it to start with. And it doesn't mean you can't have parallel or stapled entities or other ways to deal with these issues. So that comes into the next question. Gee, we're working in Canada, we're in early stages. Should we set up in Canada or should we set up in the US? We're going to launch our product in Canada, but then we're going to go into the US. Again, it's hard. Canada is one of those countries. It's hard to do a flip. So if I were you, I would do this in a way that I get my crystal ball out and figure out who you are and who you're going to be. And I would do this in a way, I guess I can stop sharing my screen. I would do this in a way that accomplishes your goals. If you can't see me, chat me. I would do this in a way that accomplishes your goals as a business matter, and then go that way. Are you a Canadian company or are you a U.S. company? Now you might say, well, we're both. No shame in that. Set up one of each. You know, set up one of each. You can have parallel entities. You can do license agreements between the two of them. But if you know your exit is going to be one or the other, I think that's where I would start. It's going to be a lot easier than trying to do it later. So is a U.S. C Corp required if a foreign company is only selling online? All right, what a great question. So this is why I spend so much time on the state stuff. So again, we got our schizophrenic system here, federal and state. So for federal purposes, you know, you're going to have potential liability. Remember what I said about jurisdiction? You're going to have potential liability if you're selling into the U.S. market, depending on what country you're from. That is more meaningful or not. So you might get drug into a U.S. lawsuit because you've targeted this market. So it's a good idea to limit your liability. For tax purposes, you only have tax liability here if either your income is effectively connected with the U.S. trade or business, or if you're from a treaty country, it's a country that the U.S. has a treaty with, if you have a permanent establishment in the U.S. Yeah, don't go to sleep on me just yet. Let me tell you what that means, because it is important. It means you have some substantial presence here. So if you're selling into the U.S., I think you're going to want to protect yourself with some sort of entity. If you're worried about taxes, you don't need the entity if you're only selling online, if you're worried about federal taxes. Now, having said that, we have to deal with the state system. The state system is way different than the federal system. I just showed you how. You could end up theoretically with state income tax nexus, selling only online. You could end up with a sales tax obligation depending on how you sell online, what kind of reseller you're using. And so for that reason, you might want to put an entity between you and the state, just to put a blocker there to deal with all of your state compliance. I think as a general rule, there comes a point when you're going to have your activities in this country are going to be substantial enough, right, that you're going to want to formalize that presence here, because it's just a matter of time at that point before either a taxing system or a court is going to be calling on you. So which foreign countries are U.S. and California friendly in terms of doing business, including taxes? Which foreign countries are U.S. friendly? I'm not sure what that means, but I'll take a guess. I think what you mean, Well, let me put it this way. So the United States has income tax treaties with most of the industrialized world, not all of it. So if you are from a treaty country with which the U.S. has an income tax treaty, that helps immensely in terms of your potential tax exposure. It also, I'll just tell you from experience, it helps in terms of audit risk. I'll give you an example. We do not have an income tax treaty with Taiwan. We do have an income tax treaty with China. I see way more Taiwan companies get audited, or Taiwan-owned companies get audited than China-owned companies, because it's lower hanging fruit. So, so in that sense, if there's an income tax treaty, I think that makes this a little friendlier jurisdiction. Otherwise, it doesn't come down to law. It comes down to other things. We haven't even talked about the other intangibles. Language, right? If you're from an English-speaking country, I think it's going to be a lot easier to do business here. UK, US, Canada, US, etc. Type of law, if you're from a common law jurisdiction, it probably makes a little more sense doing business here. There are some jurisdictions that, or even civil law jurisdictions that are based on English, like in the Caribbean. But other than the treaty, I'm not sure it really matters too much other than that. I mean, I can't think of a reason that it does. Wow, we got somebody from Africa. Finally, I didn't see you show up on my poll. So I own a business in Tanzania, but I have a business in the U.S. through Delaware, and I have a bank in the U.S. So this is complicated. Somebody books here, the money goes in the bank in the U.S., and the money has to be sent to somebody in Turkey. All right, stop. I'm not even going to get into that. Instead, I'm going to tell you, I know where you're going with this. This is a complex intercompany relationship, and I have a whole set of slides on this. We didn't get to it. But I did want to talk about this. So let me tell you what the issues are. So number one, that's good that you're able to articulate that and write that out. It needs to be in an agreement somewhere, right? You need to have an intercompany agreement between your African parent and your US subsidiary. And that agreement should say what the relationship is between the parties. And when that money goes from customer either to US company back to Tanzania, or in your case, if that, we have sale from let's say we have sales services, maybe before or after sale services in the US, we have sale from Tanzania to US customer, and money goes back to Turkey, or however it works, you need to have that documented. Okay, why is that so important? And this is another little tip about doing business in the US, is that the US is, paper is so important, right? Paper is very important. The paper is, oftentimes it's just the beginning and end of the story, what people agreed to, even controlled companies. Even though it seems silly to you as business people, it's one pocket or the other, but it's important to the taxing authorities, because you need something that shows them, why that money is moving around the way it is. If you don't have that, they're going to take the position every time that money is moving in the least tax advantageous way possible. Now, I can tell you lots of war stories. I do tax controversy also, or people in my office do. I used to do a lot more of it, but I'm not sure I got the stomach for it anymore. But I will tell you that you would be surprised if I would tell you some of the positions that I've seen the IRS take, right? Because we didn't have paper, that said this is what this payment is for. And their position is, oh, well, then it's for, imagine the worst thing possible. Then it's for this non-deductible expense. All right, so you got to have paper just to document it. That's number one. Number two, we have a concept here in every industrialized nation called transfer pricing. That means that every one of these companies in your chain here has to be compensated on an arm's length basis for its function and its risk. All right, so what does that mean? So if you've got your sales and marketing subsidiary here in the US just facilitating sales, it doesn't have to make a lot of money, but it's got to make a little bit of money. It has to be paid as much as you'd pay an independent agent, right? So there are rules of thumb. I don't know if I want to say any on a recording that's going to be public, but there are rules of thumb that you can abide by and feel fairly safe that the tax authorities here are going to look at that and say, close enough, But if you don't comply with this at all, a tax authority will look at this and say, wow, we can do a transfer pricing adjustment. They should have left more income in the US, right? They should have paid, the foreign company should have paid the US company more. for providing that service, right? And they didn't. So we're going to audit and we're going to get tax, plus we're going to get penalties because they got it wrong. Penalties for a transfer pricing mistake adjustment can be as much as 40% of the underwithheld tax. So there's ways to deal with that. Okay, there are ways to deal with that. You need professionals. Sometimes you need economists. Those are transfer pricing adjustments. So those are that's intercompany agreements. That's documenting the relationship. All right. So next question. How about a U.S. company wanting to set up a subsidiary in other countries? Which is more common than other way around? Yes, I do that too, and it's on my second slide. This is an inbound presentation, but if this were outbound, I would add to the slide some people I know who will provide that service, localization services in foreign countries. Again, outsource it. Don't try to do it yourself. You know, I've heard stories about people coming here. I'm not to pick on any French people in the audience. I heard a story about people coming here from France, and you know, the first thing they needed to do is put gas in their car. But how do you do that? You know, you don't have a credit card, right? It's hardly anyone. If you got cash, I suppose. So you need help in every country, and it's the same going to France. If I went to France, I'd have to get someone to help me do that too. So, but from my standpoint as a lawyer, first I'm going to, you know, put you in touch with some localization folks to take care of the nuts and the bolts on the ground stuff. But as a lawyer, I'm going to ask the exact same questions. Am I going to be taxable in your country? Because if I am, I'm not sure I want to be. Am I going to be subject to your laws? Because as much as I badmouth California's laws, you know, other countries have laws that are pretty tough. I mean, try to fire somebody in Europe, right? Try to terminate a distributor contract in Europe. I've had clients try to do that and learn the hard way that that's not easy to do, no matter what that agreement says. So before I'm going to step into that and assume those liabilities, just the same as you come in here, I want us to have a subsidiary. Well, hardly, you know, and I'll do a branch if we get good local advice that says we should, but I'm reluctant for that reason. All right, now we have, holy cow, I got a bunch of questions in the chat that did not make it to the Q&A. So, oh, holy cow, nobody could see my slides. All right. Let's see what else we got. Yes, the slides are going to be available. Yes, you can find me on LinkedIn. You can just Google Royse Law, YouTube, you'll find all the slides. Rob Lau is going to send the slides and the recording to you on Eventbrite as well, so don't worry, you'll get them. All right. Do we need to be a U.S. citizen to open a U.S. corporation? I think I answered that. The answer is no. Here's an interesting question. Does a green card help for an LLC? Well, here's the thing. If you have a green card, yes, the answer is yes. It makes all the difference in the world. You're no longer you're no longer taxed as a non-resident alien. If you have a green card, or even if you don't have a green card, if you're here, if you pass a substantial presence here, in other words, if you're here for more than 183 days, or if you're here under a formula that I won't get into, but generally it works out to about 4 months a year over 3 years. You're considered a U.S. person for tax purposes. That means you're taxed on your worldwide income. Your worldwide income. All right. So be super careful about that. But the good news is it means you can own an S corp. Now you can form an LLC. It's all going to pass through and be taxed to you. But that's okay because it's one level of tax instead of two. So U.S. persons, you know, pass-through entities are something that are worth looking into. Foreign persons, almost never. Somebody says it's not worth doing an LLC, always go for a C Corp. That is the conventional wisdom here in California, and that's because I work with technology startups, and technology startups, they typically are go big or go home companies. Are either going to go out and get venture capital and be a very big deal. They're going to be the next unicorn or decacorn, or they're not going to be anything at all. But in other parts of the country, in fact, you don't have to go far at all. That is not the rule. That's not the thinking. Those companies are not going to go public or have VC investors or do all that C corporation stuff. Instead, they're just going to make we do a whole program on this. You can find it online. All right, so let's see, let me look at my questions. There's a lot of questions about immigration here. So let me just pause on that for a minute and then go back to my Q&A. I get this a lot. People say, I'm going to form a company in the U.S. because I want to immigrate to the U.S. So I'm going to use that company to help me do it. That's possible, but it's not easy. It's not easy at all. That company has to have real presence here. It has to be a real company. It's not something you're going to do overnight. Typically, you should form a company here because you want to do business in the United States and you want to build a great company and a great business and access all those things you can find in Silicon Valley. If you're looking to form a company just so that you can obtain immigration status, there's easier ways to do that. There are investor-related visas. So talk to an immigration lawyer about that before you go down that route. Okay, here's a question. So here's somebody who has investors on the cap table. They're a foreign corporation. And and by the way, thank you for this. This is super common, happens all the time. We've got a company, we've been successful in our home country. We've got investors, we've got advisors, we've got all these people on the cap table. And now we went and talked to the VCs and big surprise, they want us to come they want us to become a US company. So how do we do that? How do we accomplish that? Can I do a flip transaction? So that makes it way harder. I'll just warn you. The more people you have on your cap table, the harder it gets because you're going to have to get their consent to do this transaction. Okay, so you're going to have to go around to all of them and get them to agree to it. Number two, if you are from some countries, it's going to be a taxable event for all of those folks. So now you're not only going to have to get their consent, you're going to have to say, and by the way, you're going to pay tax in your home country on this transaction. So when we have that scenario, we'll oftentimes look for a separate way of doing this. And that separate way, like I say, it might be a parallel entity, it might be a stapled entity, it might be a license agreement, a management services agreement, or something like that. Or maybe we just bite the bullet and do it and try to manage the risk through valuation issues or something like that. But it's a good question. It's something that comes up a lot. Now, in some countries, it's even harder because you'll have governmental entities as your investors or government-backed funds. Singapore comes to mind, right? You have to get the consent of those organizations, and they might have invested in you because they want to keep you in country. So, so it can be a tough situation. I'll just warn you, which is why I'd prefer that you just set it up as a U.S. company to start with. If you're in one of those countries, that's going to make it hard on you. It's going to make it difficult. Okay, here's a country. We've got a foreign company doing all of its transactions online. Do they need to create a U.S. entity? It really depends on what the transactions are, because and how much connection do you have to this country? The answer is no. In fact, you don't have to create a U.S. entity to do business in the U.S., right? You don't have to do that. So if I gave you that impression, that's wrong. You can do all the business. There's nothing I said here that doesn't apply equally to a foreign company. You can do business as a branch. You can do business without having an employee here. You don't have to have a U.S. entity to do business here in the U.S. However, if you want to minimize your tax burden and limit your liability, at some point you will have a U.S. entity. And what I'm trying to, I guess, impart here is at what point do you want to do that? At what point do you get your feet wet? Do you jump in with both feet, to mix my metaphors, and actually, take the plunge, form that U.S. company, that U.S. corporation? So yeah, the company that does all transactions online and all they're delivering is digital content, they're probably not going to form a U.S. entity until they have really substantial U.S. commerce. And at that point, they're going to start worrying. This is how it always goes. They're going to start worrying about U.S. liability. And at that point, they're going to want to put a U.S. entity between themselves and that market as a blocker of both that liability and that tax liability. And now, as I said, over the last couple of years, state tax liability as well. So I guess the answer is it's a matter of degree. that might not be the most satisfying answer, but that's what I would have to say. It's a matter of degree, and it requires a lot of thought and a lot of planning. So let me talk about a couple of other things unless we have any more questions here, because I didn't get to everything that I wanted to cover. So I'm going to go back to my screen. This is great. I get to talk more about tax. So, all right, you should see my screen. Chat me if you don't. And so there's a time we still do some international intellectual property holding company structures. A lot of you have danced around this question, so let me just confront this, up front. You've got your intellectual property that's sitting someplace else. You want to come into the United States and access this market. On the other hand, or you want to go the other way. But what you're trying to do is access the market, but not subjecting all of your U.S. intellectual property to U.S. taxation. And up until 2 years ago, the U.S. was considered a pretty high tax jurisdiction. Our corporate tax rate is now 21%. So 2 years ago, this is the structure that you would have seen quite often, right? You would have seen, a U.S. company owning a foreign company that would own the intellectual property. Here's a better example. That would have a tax haven company that would own intellectual property and would gather. Now, we all used to remember the double Dutch sandwich, the Dutch-Irish sandwich, the structures we used to hear about. You heard about Apple and stateless income, and multinational corporations not paying tax anywhere in the world. Well, this is how they did it, through sophisticated international tax planning. You can blame me for a lot of that, but we would set up foreign entities, and it's that very mobile income. Well, that all has really changed dramatically after 2017. So this structure probably doesn't work anymore for a lot of reasons, but you're just not going to see it as often. It's a discussion we don't have to have anymore, because the way the tax law taxes that now, there's this thing called GILTI. It's general intangibles tax. It'll tax the U.S. company on the income of tax haven company that's attributable to its general intangibles, which for most of my tech company startups is going to be almost everything, if it's not otherwise taxed in U.S. under some other regime. So we hardly see this anymore, and I'm not getting the question that often for U.S. companies. Now, if you're a foreign company, you have more opportunities. If you're a foreign company, let me go back a slide, you're going to find ways to do stuff like this, to leave your intellectual property outside the United States and put as little process and function in the United States as possible. This is late stage planning. This is sophisticated planning. This is not startup style planning. Just keep that in mind. All right. Let's see if there's anything else. I guess the last thing I'll leave you with is capitalization. When you do form your U.S. corporation, and I think despite all the bad things I said about California, I think I convinced you to do that. You're going to wonder how you're going to capitalize it. That money is going to either go in as debt or equity. They are much different. Debt has to be repaid. You have to pay yourself interest. It has to come back. Equity does not have to be repaid. But if you do pay back dividends back to the parent company, you don't get a deduction for it. So, just keep in mind that it's pretty rare these days that I actually use debt, to be honest. Although for larger companies, that's a real strategy. We do this thing called interest earnings stripping by pulling money out of a U.S. company using debt. So if you get to be one of those bigger, really successful, powerful companies that has that problem, too much money, you got money burning a hole in your pocket in the U.S., come see me. We'll put in place some of these strategies to get the money out of the U.S. on a tax efficient, but very legal basis. Okay, with that, we are at 8:30. I am going to stop my share. I'm going to hand this back to Rob.
Roger, that was a lot of good information. Thanks for spending time with us and sharing your expertise. Audience members, thanks for tuning in, asking great questions. See you next time.